Our next speaker is Gary Fisher. He's been also very active in the Mars Society programs in establishing waste and remediation issues with respect to Mars Homestead as well as the Mars Society projects. But today he's talking on a slightly different subject.
Right, yeah, I usually talk about crap on Mars, but I can do that today. So. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, I'm the treasurer of the Mars Foundation. I've also been involved with the wastewater recycling and the waste recycling from agricultural waste, the non-industrial waste, the stuff that Frank's processes produce, we have yet to address. Besides my affiliation with the Mars Foundation, I'm an industrial engineer by training, by vocation. I've been a database administrator for Texas Instruments and Unisys. As an entrepreneurial thing, I've started an optical shop. I'm also on the steering committee of the Mars Society. So I'm going to do a little different talk. This is based upon a talk that I gave over a couple of years ago when we first started the Mars Homestead project. And we're trying to figure out just what it is that we're trying to do in more of a global perspective. Frank went into very detail in one area, and my talk is much broader. So what it's covering is this Mars Homestead project, which of course was to develop this semi-self-sufficient permanent settlement on Mars that would house 12 people and the occasional visitor, and would be designed from its inception to grow. And when we were trying to figure out just what the requirements for this settlement are, I thought, well, you know, we need to look at what motivates people. After all, the big question is, why go to Mars? Why do that? And what's going to keep these people there? So we looked at systems that explained human motivation, and there's a number of these. Personally, I opted for Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so this talk is basically about how that and some other issues relate to our global design concerns. So what can we say about Abraham Maslow? Well, he's dead, and sort of convenient for me because he's not here to criticize how I'm using his work, but I'm not responsible. He was a psychologist, and he studied law first, and then he studied psychology and achieved quite wide prominence while he was alive. Early in his career, he was one of the first people to deal with primates with monkeys and psychiatric research, psychological research. And it was with his work with monkeys that he noticed that certain needs take precedence over others, and he started to apply that to humans. And his primary contribution to psychology is what's known as Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. It's often presented as a pyramid. And really, as I said, it's more a focus on what motivates people. So before we go into that hierarchy, talk a little bit more about some of, at least my guiding philosophy in regards to designing a Mars settlement. The Mars environment is harsh. There's too little air, almost no oxygen, it's unbelievably cold. There's too much UV, too much radiation, it's salty, and it's very dusty. There's a lot that's unpleasant about it. But if we're going to live there, we have to start thinking of this environment as a resource, that this extra UV, this extra radiation, the cold, these are all things that we can use in our industrial processes, say, to create our Martian settlement. There was something Arthur C. Clarke once said to Walter Cronkite, and I can only paraphrase him here, but it came out, as I recall it, there's no such thing as waste, there are only resources we're too stupid to know how to use. I think it's because I put that up there that I ended up having to deal with the waste recycling issues. But this really was, to my mind, the essence of what we were trying to do here, to figure out what Martians need to know and to learn and learn what that is and teach it to them. They can't afford to be stupid. They really are living in an environment where life is nasty, brutish, and very, very short, unless you're prepared for it. Another thought was that affordable and easy to maintain life support is a necessary but insufficient component of a Martian civilization. I mean, just because you can keep people alive on Mars is no reason for them to stay there or to come there. Now, this is sort of a traditional picture of Maslow's hierarchy. It's usually presented in a pyramid form. We have a motto in the Mars Foundation, to arrive, survive, and thrive. So I've sort of shown this in terms of that part of the hierarchy, that part of the needs hierarchy that addresses survival, and those that address thriving. The bottom two areas here basically are the realm of traditional life support. At the lowest level, you have the physiological needs, the need for air, water, food, comfortable temperatures, sex. These are things that Maslow called prepotent, that you really had to address these. If you were lacking in these things, your body basically stopped focusing on anything else. Your mind stops focusing on anything else, and you have to address these needs. And some people have tried to create a hierarchy within them, like if someone's choking you, the fact that you're thirsty is somewhat irrelevant. You know, air is sort of more important than water, that kind of thing. But from the standpoint of living on Mars, it really doesn't matter. You need to supply water, food, air, etc. Maslow felt that people basically focus on the missing needs at a level. Until they're satisfied, they don't really move up. So once you've satisfied air, food, water, etc., then the next concern that people have are safety issues. This involves things like shelter, removal of fear of danger, feeling comfortable in your environment. Really, this is the sort of thing, it also involves clear rules and their enforcement. This is where children usually are sort of stuck. They need to feel safe, and hopefully their physiological needs are being met. Then once you've satisfied the physiological needs, which are necessary to keep you alive, and the safety needs, which allow you to survive, then you can start moving up more towards the higher level needs. These include love and belongingness, sometimes called the social needs, the need to give and receive affection, being part of a group. And once that's satisfied, you can move up to esteem needs, and these are differentiated. I'm sorry if this is Psych 101, but I sort of feel I have to go through it all. Esteem needs, which are self-esteem, that you feel like you're competent, that you've mastered a skill or technique, and the esteem of others. For example, that people feel you should be a leader, that sort of thing. And then above this, you have what Maslow called self-actualization, which is the point at which, since all these lower needs are met, you can actually start concentrating on being all that you can be, you know, sort of the human potential movement of the 60s and 70s sort of came out of this kind of work. And you have to excuse me. Turn off my phone. So this was the idea that this model helped us view what we had to do with our Mars settlement. And you know, why Maslow? There are lots of other theories of human motivation. There's, for example, Freud, who developed a theory about human motivation, but unfortunately, he developed his theories by studying crazy people. And so his analysis, I think, is somewhat flawed in that he's looking at people who are truly crazy in determining what motivates people. So There's also B.F. Skinner, who was a behaviorist, this guy who kept his daughter in a box while she was growing up. And frankly, he belonged on Freud's couch. So Maslow is a very optimistic person, and as a member of this space-interested group, I realize optimism is very common amongst us, and so I felt it was most appropriate. Maslow believes that people are not innately violent, that violence comes from having these lower-level needs not being met, but that in reality people are sort of moving towards love and growth, and therefore it seems far more appealing to me to look at our Martian settlement from that kind of perspective. Now, I'm going to throw this in. Near the end of his life, Maslow added a couple more levels. Above the esteem needs, he added two more, the aesthetic and the need to know and understand. And I think we can appreciate that as a motivation for some people to go to Mars, right? The need to know and understand is sort of clear. Aesthetic needs are sort of a sense of the need for beauty and for symmetry, order. And then above self-actualization, he added another level which he called transcendence. And this is a point at which not only have you achieved what you can achieve, but you now are interested in helping others achieve what they can achieve. And if you're a fan of Stargate SG-1, you know that there's another level above that called ascension. But have to have seen the show to appreciate it. Okay, so necessary but not sufficient. Life support, traditional life support, addresses those two lowest levels of the hierarchy, physiology and safety. And really, again, if you don't address those needs, you really have an environment where life is nasty, brutish, and short, and people don't act very civilly, and your Martian settlement won't get completed, and they'll kill each other, or they'll die. So for a settlement to grow, to be successful, you have to create an environment where people don't have to think too much about those two lowest levels. They'll be drawn to a settlement if they feel that you can satisfy the higher levels. Now, our Martian homestead could succeed perfectly at the first two levels, and really that's pretty much all you need to do for an exploration type mission. Keep them alive. But unless it satisfies the higher levels, it'll fail, because there are lots of places in the world today where life is not providing the physiological needs or the safety needs, and these are places people can and do leave, if they're able to. So our goal here was to plant this settlement down in the dirt of Mars as a seed that would blossom in the barren Martian environment and take over the planet like kudzu. And just giving people an ability to stay alive was insufficient to achieve that goal. So again, to review, physiological needs, very basic needs. And in fact, if you don't have these things, you feel ill or die. Certainly, you feel discomfort. Maslow called these prepotent needs. You really had to address these before you could think of anything above in the hierarchy. In point of fact, the research to date really doesn't show that the hierarchy holds, though most people sort of have an innate sense that this is how things work. The research seems to show that people don't really get stuck at a lower level, not be able to think about higher levels, or if they're at a higher level, they're not concerned about the other levels. But there have been very few, none actually, large-scale longitudinal studies to analyze this. The shorter-term studies don't seem to show it. There's something else I want to mention about this. But can't think of it, so go on. Safety needs. Now this has to do with establishing stability, consistency in a chaotic world. Certainly, we plop these 12 people down on the planet in their 3 or 4 tuna can habs with all this supplies and this enormous task in front of them to bootstrap themselves into self-sufficiency on Mars, things could be rather chaotic. It's at times like this that perhaps you really need to address in your crew selection or settler selection very carefully the kinds of people you have. And bringing married couples might certainly be an advantage here. Oh, that reminds me, I remembered what I wanted to say about this. In the West, we generally don't have to worry too much about these physiological needs. Most of us are fortunate enough to have lived without the want for those things. The question is, do you want to send people to Mars who haven't had experience with that? The first time they find themselves short of water or food or air really shouldn't be the first time because they haven't developed any coping mechanisms. So again, this addresses the issue of settler selection. You know, how do you pick people who have the coping skills, who have lived most of their life fairly high on the hierarchy, and then suddenly find themselves dropped down into a lower level? Safety also comes from the issue of rules and laws and how the management of the settlement is carried out. And these are all things that can and probably should be addressed with the individuals involved before they go to Mars. Love and belonging, the social needs. This addresses the human desire to be part of a group, and people are very good at establishing groups, but really from the standpoint of Mars, it's very hard to make it a superior environment to Earth from establishing human relationships, especially when you only have 11 other people to choose from. So again, addressing the crew selection issue here. People tend to be very creative, though, and as our society on Mars expands, we might want to try to seed it with certain useful affiliations, such as the Hydroponics Guild, and develop such systems of social affiliation. Then we move up to esteem, and again, esteem has to do with self-esteem, that you're competent, feel that you've mastered a skill or some area of knowledge. And obviously, the people we initially send to Mars have to be competent, and they have to know they're competent, and everyone else in the group has to feel that they're competent. Otherwise, the issue of safety rears its head again. It also raises a question of cross-training and to what degree you need to do that. Esteem, sometimes people get the esteem level sort of crossed with the love and belongingness level. These people tend to turn into dictators. You want to be careful that people know how to work this out. Status symbols. In our society, that's one way people sort of achieve esteem. Obviously, in our society, it also tends to be affiliated with a lot of stuff. And on Mars, we don't have a lot of stuff. Status symbols have to be other things. Recognition of achieving certain levels of competence would certainly be more appropriate. We don't really need to be too concerned about this in the design of our settlement from a technical standpoint. People are very creative, and they'll find ways of recognizing achievement. Finally, we get to the level of self-actualization. Now, Maslow thought that only 2% of the world's population ever got to this level. to be honest, I think the kinds of people who are going to Mars are people who are close to doing this and really feel that the trip will make the difference. Because otherwise, why go? You know, I mean, everything, all the other needs can be met here on Earth probably far easier. You really have to have some desire. What was it? Joseph Campbell called it following your bliss. You know, your bliss has to be living on Mars. So it's important that for our settlement to succeed, for people to want to come there, to stay there, they need to have a sense that they can achieve this self-actualization. And really, such people tend to be perhaps mentally most suitable for the task. It'll be important to get the immigrants coming to publicize the success of this, assuming we have success. So first-hand accounts, much like letters back home from people who went out west, saying, you know, I created a farm, I staked out this land, I've cleared it, and I've created a farm, and built a house, and life is wonderful. That kind of thing is going to be needed to bring people to Mars. Now, I came up with what I call Fisher's Martian life support hierarchy. We're fortunate, we live in a biosphere. We have life forms all around us that are taking the sunlight raining down on the Earth and turning it into air and materials to make shelter out of, and food and water. Mars, as far as we know, doesn't have a biosphere, certainly not one robust enough to do that. So, interestingly, when you're looking at the things that you need to focus on first, the most important thing is energy. And we kept finding this as we did our design. We kept having to add nuclear reactors to the settlement design because we couldn't live in a power-poor environment. Without that thermal energy and the electrical energy, it became impossible to satisfy the needs. So energy and some capacity to store it, such as in a fuel for safety needs, sort of is first on the hierarchy of life support needs. After that, you need to provide people with shelter, meaning some inhabitable volume that's at appropriate pressure, temperature, shields you from the radiation and other nasty aspects of the Martian environment. Then comes air, water, food, light, clothing, optional. Then one of the commonly identified, well, not commonly, one of the lesser commonly identified physiological needs is protection from bacterial attack. Hopefully there aren't any native Martian bacteria that are waiting to attack us, but medicine, medical supplies, and equipment also address really the physiological level of the needs. Then interestingly, we have other concerns here. We are a very isolated group of 12 people on this settlement. So to avoid that isolation, to satisfy that belongingness need and safety needs, you have to develop a communication system, a very reliable communication system. And then to really succeed at doing what we want to do, extracting Martian resources and building a settlement, you need some sort of surface transport and the ability to navigate around the planet. So this is sort of an odd collection, but that's what I came up with when I thought, well, what is the priority that we need to address? Now, obviously, in order to create our settlement, we bring a lot of this with us initially in the Mars Direct, Mars Design Reference Mission style habitats that they live in while they're building the settlement. And that building mode is what we call a bootstrap mode. So obviously, as I said, we needed to have an energy source, and they arrive, as with Zubrin's Mars Direct, with small nukes. But in order to go beyond just surviving there in these habitats, we ship them some very large nukes to generate the power they need. Along with the fuel supply system. We also have a period of close to 10 Earth years in which to build this settlement. So in order to satisfy their safety needs, we have these habitats, but we also send along a supply of food, a water recycling system, because until they drill a well successfully, they have to recycle what they bring with them. So we have this bootstrap collection of equipment that comes with them. And from that set of stuff, you really can't do any recycling of the material content, okay? Until you start to make replacements. In other words, you're bringing with you life support equipment, but you're also bringing with you equipment to build the settlement. But one of the first things that stuff has to do is make some backups. Unless you can afford to ship backups from Earth, right? You need to start making backups. So you have to sort of treat these systems and tools and the raw materials that are imported as sort of a separate group of things from what you can make the settlement from. So first step is to make the replacements, and the priority would be, since we have the nukes, those 2 through 11 items on that list I had. Eventually, you achieve what I call the dawn of self-sufficiency. You've got the replacements, so you can have a failure, and now you can start using the systems you brought to build the settlement and build your shelters, build your water supply, your food supply, your greenhouses. And it's really at that point that you finally move beyond that physiological and safety need level of the hierarchy. It's really only at that point that people become secure enough that they can start thinking of the higher goals. So my little plug for waste processing here. There is another need that sort of spans 1 through 8 above in that list I had, and that's waste processing. It doesn't really have to be waste recycling, but people tend to create waste. And it has to be dealt with, and dealt with in a way that you don't end up fouling the habitat. Okay, well, actually, the next speaker is Bruce, who's at a board meeting until it shows up. I'm getting close to finish. Some thoughts on settlement design. One of the things we asked ourselves when we sat down is, we asked this question, is it that most of the issues that are before us, have they been well researched? I mean, are the answers out there? And as we studied this issue, it became very obvious that they're not. There's been very little done on settlement. A lot done on exploration systems, but very little on settlement. So again, a plug for people who are interested, we need volunteers to look at a lot of these design concerns. We chose early on to avoid futures, to not depend upon miracles to make this happen. So we want to use existing technology in the design as much as possible. Frank basically had to come up with some new technology in order to make plastics out of Martian air and water, because until we find an oil well on Mars, we really don't have a choice. And there is no way to avoid some of that. And obviously we need to flesh that out. Does it really work? Can we build this tabletop models of these systems and start producing polyester and polyurethane? and polyethylene.
You doubt that.
Pardon?
Why should you doubt that?
Why should I doubt that? Why should I trust my life to it on Mars? You know, we need to. I don't know. Frank, are you comfortable? You ready to go to Mars? With
What I'll say is that I didn't come up with these reactions out of thin air. They're all patented reactions, and what they're used in very large facilities.
right.
And the real issue is building a reliable one on a small scale, using on Mars for many years.
So there are questions to be answered. So, and you know, it's been the tried and true method is what's gotten people through in the past. So that's what we're planning on doing. As an aside, you know, for 40 years of my life, artificial intelligence and nuclear fusion have always been just 10 years away. Always 10 years away. 30 years ago, they were 10 years away. 20 years ago, they were 10 years away. We really can't count on these things, and it'd be sort of silly to do so. I have a theory, though, that artificial intelligence will be first, and people will go to that artificial intelligence and say, can you solve the problem of nuclear fusion? And it'll say, yes, in 10 years. The primary focus of past and current research in life support has really been not for planetary surfaces. It's been for microgravity environments, under orbital conditions. Environmental closure is less important on Mars than in space, and the trade-off is one of energy use, primarily to extract the required resources from the environment, and to maintain those conditions, environmental conditions within human tolerance, in exchange for less closure. And certainly, it's got to be a more cost-effective approach. And Zubrin's very fond of saying Mars has all the resources. We have a series of system metrics for doing space missions today, equivalent mass, equivalent system mass. And I really don't think that they're appropriate for design in the Mars settlement. A more appropriate metric to my mind is something like an equivalent system energy, since on Mars the limiting factor is not launch capacity to put stuff into space, but the energy available that you have available to manipulate the resources you have at hand. And so, you know, you're going to look at designing a metric that considers energy availability, thermal, electric, etc., more important than mass. Other things that might go into a good metric would be simplicity versus complexity, low maintenance versus high maintenance, especially for settlement, ability to grow, the in situ resource percentage used versus imported resource, decentralized control versus centralized control. For settlers, life support systems are not a social program, they're not a public utility, they're not something provided by the lowest bidder on a government contract. They're their business, they're what they do. This is the rest of their life on this planet, this is what they're about. Okay? Got to think of it in those terms. We want to create an environment that actually is hospitable to business, where people go out and compete against each other to provide those essential things for life support. Okay? It's not a kibbutz and it's not Antarctica. No, we're too far away. And don't forget that our settlement has to also consider that these people are going to live their lives out there. They're going to need other services besides life support. Right? They're going to need banking, insurance, entertainment, communications, transport, education, childcare, all those things that are integral to our life today. And so our settlement needs to somehow facilitate creating those. And I suspect a lot of these occupations will be taken up by people as sidelines to what they were tasked with in terms of building the settlement or keeping it going. And you know, you could bring people from Earth to provide these, but I think when you go to select your people, you want people with skill sets that go beyond construction. Now, if you look at Westerns, what did every Western town have in the movies? They always had a hotel, a saloon, restaurant, brothel, you know, sort of a physiological needs thing there. Some jail or sheriff's office, you know, we're talking about law and order here. A barber shop, perhaps some steam level thing. A livery stable, blacksmith, but basically parking and auto repair, rover repair. A train station, telegraph, transportation communications office, undertaker, church, and of course a bank to be robbed if it's a Western.
Forgot the doctor.
And the doctor, yes. Oh, it's a doctor. You always seem to be playing cards in the saloon. So you need to design a settlement that can grow to accommodate these kinds of services and businesses. Historically, that town portion of a settlement is dependent upon some other major economic activity. You know, port, tourism, ranching, farming, mining, a whole bunch of different things. So the real question is, what is the main economic support for a Martian settlement? What is it that people are going to do when they get there? What's going to make this settlement viable? And to be honest, we haven't addressed that. I don't really know what the answer is.
Carbon mining.
Carbon mining. Everyone has a theory. Could be. I think Martha sort of addressed that a little bit in her triangle trade talk, but so that's it. I'll be happy to take any questions. Martha?
Could you please flash back to your Fisher's marginalized program hierarchy for just a few seconds?
There.
Thank you.
So you can take notes. Okay. Any other questions?
Do you see the development of many Martian brothels?
Do I see it? Not at least a lot of married couples. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.